Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today, I've teased you guys long enough with this. It's time to finally do this review and demo. The 2020 Gibson Custom Shop Monkey SG recreation, in both the left-handed version and the right-handed version. But before we even talk about what Gibson did this time, we need to understand the story behind the original Monkey SG. Okay, so this is essentially the guitar that birthed heavy metal that Tony Iommi used in the early days of Black Sabbath. Just as a fun fact though, it was almost a Sunburst Stratocaster from the pre-CBS era that was repainted white that birthed metal. But thankfully for the history of the SG, the pickups in that Stratocaster died on the first song while they were recording, so he had to switch to his backup guitar, which was this SG Special. But how on earth did he get this guitar in the first place anyways? I mean, if you don't know a lot about vintage Gibsons, there were not that many Lefties made. But he was able to pick one up in 1967 in a town called Birmingham in England. As you can kind of guess by this guitar, Tony himself is a left-handed guitarist, and he had initially purchased a right-handed SG, and he had just strung it up backwards and played it the best to his abilities because, you know, finding a left-handed guitar at that point in time that was of any quality was very difficult. But he happened to have heard someone in Birmingham that was in the same situation as him, but the opposite. He was a righty playing a lefty guitar, whereas Iommi was a lefty playing a righty. So on that fateful day, they did the swap so they could both have the guitars that would more suit their own playing styles. And then it was used pretty much for the first 4 to 5 albums within Black Sabbath's history. But as you can tell, just by looking at this one, this might be the custom shop recreation, but this is what his original one looks like yet today. He made a lot of changes to it to make this guitar better for his own playing style. And there's something you need to understand about Tony Iommi as to why he made these modifications. Because a normal 64 SG would look like this. The biggest things to note are that large tenon cover and the large pickguard. You have the reflector style knobs, and the tuners on the back are this Kluson bar style. There's 3 per side. These were initially kind of a budget level guitar, but they've become valuable today because it's still a vintage guitar and a lot of people have made them famous. But something else you need to know about Tony Iommi is he does not have 2 of his fingertips. This is pretty well known at this point, but the story behind that is it was his last day of his job before he was going big with his band. He was going to quit his job and just do music. And he even thought about calling off that day, but his mom said, no, don't do that to him. Go show up, do your last day of work. But his job was welding pieces of metal together, and the person who would be cutting the metal just happened to call off that day, so his boss said, hey, why don't you do this? So they've got this guillotine press going on, and he accidentally got his fingers caught in that, and it just sliced him, and then he pulled back, and he just lost the tips of his middle and ring finger. And so he was rushed off to the hospital. They had to saw off the bone that was exposed. And then at that point in his career, right when it was supposed to all be taken off, he was just left with dismay and heartache. He was told he would never play guitar again. But thankfully, he was then introduced to the works of a guy called Django Reinhardt. Now, he is a guy who's known for doing jazzy stuff with only 2 fingers. He still had his thumb, but he'd be playing like this and be playing like a mad monster. So that kind of gave Tony some hope that he could play guitar again. And over a few different years, he went through a few different thimble designs, ended up using leather tips that kind of looks like just regular fingers. And that allowed him to play guitar again through a bunch of rehabilitation. But due to that injury, he had to make a few modifications to this guitar in order to make it better to suit him. First off, he uses really light gauge strings. We're talking 8s, so he's not quite as extreme as Gibbons with a 7 set. But I'd imagine those really thin gauge strings were pretty hard to find in the mid-60s. But what he also did is he filed down the frets to be super flat. And to make it even easier for him to play, you'll notice the fretboard on these guys are actually lacquered in polyurethane. This is something you never see in Gibson history. This is more like a Rickenbacker type thing. That's where I've known it from when I played one of their basses. And that was the main feature that made me go, yes, we need to document this guitar, because Gibson just doesn't do that. So seeing that on this reissue and knowing the reason why it's there is super fascinating to me. But the next issue he was having with his guitar was tuning instability, partly due to how the neck kept shifting on him because of the inferior neck joint on these earlier SGs, and his lighter string gauge just didn't like his tuners and things like that. So what he did is he put Schaller tuners on here. You can see these reissues have a similar style on here, instead of the Klusons that it originally had. And besides those tuners, he actually went through quite a few different tailpiece modifications. So a lot of dealers and people will look at this and say, huh, this looks like a tailpiece stud. That must just be left over from how this guitar originally was pre-modifications. No, that wasn't ever on an SG Special stock in the mid-60s. He actually had a bridge and tailpiece setup. Judging by the relic job here, he must have had a trapeze tailpiece system on here at one point in time too, but never any type of tremolo unit, or else we would have different holes in here. But he eventually ended up using this style. This is called a Leo Kwan Badass Bridge. This did not happen until about the time he retired this guitar, maybe even after it, as far as the stories I've heard. So even though this is how the guitar looks today, this is not how it was used in all those concerts, for the most part. But one of the most interesting features that he did to help this is another thing that you never see on a Gibson guitar, is he had a 0 fret installed on here. So if you don't know what a 0 fret is, it's basically taking the place of the nut, where you place a fret at the 0 position and then that starts your scale length. And what's nice about that is you can put any type of gauge strings on here without having to redo your nut, so that kind of helped him do the lighter gauge strings. But that is a modification he made to make the guitar play a little bit better for him. And it's another first for Gibson's custom shop as far as I'm aware. So between that and the lacquered fretboard, that just told me, document this guitar. It doesn't matter if they're ridiculously expensive. So now that he can play the guitar and he's got the tuning stability a little bit better and the intonation all set up on these, the last thing that he had issues with this guitar was low sustain and output. So he had to find a way to make this guitar better in that aspect. Now, it wasn't necessarily just the guitar's problem that it had that. It was due to his unique playing style with his new prosthetic fingertips, as well as some of these other mods did hurt the sustain of the guitar. And the style of music that he played required turning the amps up really loud, so he was getting a bunch of squealing from the original electronics as well. So what he did is he partnered with John Birch. I believe he might have been the guy who did some of these other modifications as well, but since getting aftermarket pickups was not a thing you could do in the 60s, he essentially just bought part of a company in John Birch. He was like an investor within them in order to get him to build him like custom wound pickups. Eventually he just started building him custom guitars as well, but that's why the pickups are kind of interesting in here. So the neck pickup is a John Birch creation called the Superflux pickup. If you get in there, you can actually read it says Superflux by John Birch. But you're going to notice this has a lot more pole pieces than a standard Gibson style right here. You have 9 of them versus the 6. He definitely at least had both of the pickups wax potted so they wouldn't do the squealing, and you had these custom surrounds made with the chrome pickup covers here. Now, why do they have to have these giant surrounds? Remember, that comes back to that large tenon cover that this initially had. They were probably trying to clean up the look of the guitar as well as have a new way to mount it and use up some space that wasn't initially used by the original setup of these guitars. And another thing that they did in order to stop all the squealing is they shielded off all the cavities as well. I'm really curious to see if the custom shop actually did that as well. We'll see that on the workbench here in a minute. And also for playability, they moved the strap button to the top horn right here just so it would balance better. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about the infamous Monkey SG. It's just a highly modified 64 Gibson SG Special that was just, modified to the tastes of the player to make it easier to play the type of music that he was trying to do, and it just kind of marked its place in birthing metal history. Now you're probably wondering what's the story of the Monkey. It doesn't take long to explain this. Essentially, Iommi, he had this really cool jacket that he liked, but it was rather plain, so he would just start adding decals to it, and he happened to find this fiddler monkey sticker, and he just happened to slap it on the guitar, and he liked it, so it just stuck and became part of history. It's a little bit doofy looking, but I love it. And the other thing you'll notice on these reissues is there's this weird wear mark on the headstock. There used to be a sticker on there, I believe it said by John Birch, because you got to remember he was part of that company for a point in time, so he probably had that on the headstock to advertise his guitars as well as custom pickups, is the vibe that I'm getting from this all. But that was later removed when he wasn't part of the company anymore. But despite being heavily used from about 1969, it was retired not too long after that, in 6 years in 1975. And the reason why he retired it is there was literally no backup for this guitar. He feared somebody stealing this because it was once stolen, and this is where the curse of this guitar comes in. Apparently, the guy who had stolen this had such awful luck. He ended up pawning it at a pawn shop, and then the record label was able to get it back from there, and they gave it back to Tony. So that's why some people view the original guitar as slightly cursed. It just doesn't get any more metal than that. So you can now view the original in the Hard Rock Cafe in New York City. I believe they still have it on display. That might change now that these things have came out. It was probably borrowed for a little bit so they could create these guitars. So this is the 2020 custom shop recreation of that guitar. They're aged in-house and signed by Tony on the back side of the headstock here. And they're also numbered as to what set they are. And they only made 25 sets of these, so that means there's 25 right-handed ones made and 25 left-handed ones. These were sold in sets to dealers, but the public could buy either or. But it was a real dilemma to me, which one should I buy? Because, you know, Iommi's original one is a left-handed, but I play right-handed, so I couldn't really do a playing demo unless I had a right-handed one. So I just went ahead and bought both for this review and demo. I am not a Gibson custom shop dealer. I'm just a guy that spent $40,000 on these. That's right, they were $20K a pop. And is it worth it as a guitar? No, no, it is not. I don't think there's any guitar that's worth that much just on its own. It's worth this much due to the collectible nature of these. And by collectible nature, it's a super limited run signed by Mr. Iommi himself. And it's a recreation of a very prominent guitar that a lot of people know about. So it checks all those right boxes that I needed to do this full documentation. Oh, and you have the bragging rights that you own one of the Tony Iommi Monkey SGs. That's pretty much why the rich collectors buy these guys. Because realistically, with 20 grand, you could buy anywhere between 3 to 4 original SGs, but then you have to remember that you don't have all this other stuff, like the modified knobs, the Leo Kwan bridge, the John Birch pickup that they brought these things out of retirement just to put in these guitars. I mean, there is a lot of things that make these the collectible guitars that they are. They're definitely not for everybody, though. But I'm sure you guys will enjoy getting to see these things anyways. But not only do you get the guitar, you actually get some pretty cool case candy as well. First up here, you get a real genuine leather strap by Heavy Leather that's made in New York City. You can actually buy this exact strap on their website for $385. This is quite the expensive strap, but it's got his Iommi crosses inlaid into them. But perhaps the coolest piece of case candy is in here. So you get this box, and inside this box is a coffin. And it's got the Iommi cross in it. It says Iommi right there. And then as you open it, yeah, it's a purple lined coffin. And you get an Iommi cross in here. So Iommi's known for wearing one of these things, but it also has special symbols on the back of it. He gave one of these to each of the collaborators in his first solo studio album. So outside of that, I'm pretty sure this is the only way you can actually get one of these. An official one anyways. But check out the detail on this coffin. This is probably the coolest case candy that Gibson's done outside of the Slash hat. I don't think I'm quite cool enough to wear this though. And that's pretty much it for the really cool case candy, but you do get a unique certificate of authenticity. It's like a faux leather outside, and you have the Iommi branding on it. And inside you get a nice picture of Iommi himself. You get your custom shop sticker, your warranty, and you get an extra monkey decal. So you could stick it on the case, stick it on your fridge, I don't care. It's just a nice freebie. So now that we know all about the Monkey SG and the custom shop recreations, let's go ahead, throw these things on the workbench, compare their aging jobs, and just see how good of a guitar these things can be, as well as check their build quality. And then finally, get to a playing demo to see how these things sound. Well, here's a sight you'll never see anywhere else. Somebody tearing apart their $20,000 guitars. Now, this has no effect on the value. It came unassembled from the factory and they assembled it there. Taking off screws does not hurt a guitar. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a second to appreciate the aging job. This Lefty one, I'm actually pretty happy with. Because if you get it in the light just right, I mean, you can tell it's still an aging job, but the finish checking that they did with the razor blade is a little bit more realistic on this one than it is on my Righty. And you'll see that here in a minute. So this one, it still has a repeated pattern, but it's still randomized enough that, you know, it just doesn't look like somebody was repeating the same thing over and over and over again. But here we go. So once you take the tenon cover off, I doubt this is necessarily 100% replica of his. I would imagine that there would actually be different size screw holes somewhere, because his initially had that big long thing. But this is what everybody wants to see. The Superflux by John Birch. What is underneath this pickup? It's just kind of like a standard mini humbucker route for the most part, but you've got a long neck tenon, and just looks like your regular route in there. They did a very nice job. I don't see any like super frayed bits, unless you count that small area right there, but that's nothing. But here's what the backside of one of those looks like. It just reads John Birch Superflux. And the way that they mount them is they use two springs right here that secure with a nut. So that probably makes those a lot easier to install since it uses a system like that. But the surround itself, it's just a large piece of plastic. And you might say, hey, is that backwards? No, the left-handed version, it's mounted this way. So when you're looking down this way, you're actually reading it the proper way. Whereas on the right-handed version, it faces downward. So that's a small difference between these two. But your bridge pickup is actually different here. You're going to notice there's no screws there to secure it. That is just there in place. Essentially what these little legs are doing, they're actually holding these goof hiders in place. Because once you screw that down, these will not move. But once you take that off, these can move and you can remove them if you wanted to. So how exactly does this one secure then? It's the traditional Gibson P90 style. So there's two screws right there. You can see what they look like right there. But surprisingly, there's no springs or any type of foam in here. And I was shocked to see that this one is also a Superflux by John Birch. But here's what the inside cavity of one of these things looks like. So somebody was asking me what the pickup readings were in these guys. So our bridge pickup, it's supposed to be hot traditionally, so that's 16.88. That is a really smoking P90. So then we move on over to our neck pickup. It's still pretty hot in and of itself, so 15.91. And the middle for fun should probably be what, 8? Yeah, 8.2. One last thing before we move on, the bottom of this surround actually has like this little rubber gripper on it. I'm not sure why that's there, but it's not on the neck pickup. And here's another thing that probably varies from the original Monkey SG, is the reason why his would have goof hiders is probably to hide all the different types of bridges that was once on here. But you can see on this one, it's just your standard stop bar tailpiece. I guess if you really wanted to, you know, jack everything up, you could move it back here and have a really extended scale length, and yeah, that would not work out so well. But these little goof hiders are pretty much just toggle switches. In fact, that's probably the exact same material. But you're going to notice that nut is still soldered onto the leg right there. So if you wanted to convert it to the way the other one was mounted, you technically could. The reason why the goof hiders are kind of cool is that's a real thing that Gibson did in the 70s to cover up factory mishaps. So they kind of have their own interesting vibe to them. But we'll just take a moment here to see the rest of this guitar. They even did the finish checking underneath the pick guard, so that's attention to detail right there. And this guy has the witch hat knobs on it. You can see he actually has those sticking up pretty high, but I'm guessing that's just how his were on here. And then the ever so famous fiddler monkey. Now, when I think I'm buying an exact replica, I really thought that everything would be the same. But it's not. I really think since this is just like in-house aging, they have a template of what has to be there, and then the artist can take liberties from there. I would have thought one of the things that would have been standard on the Monkey would be it would be aged properly. But you're actually going to see there's significant differences in how they aged this guy. So this one has a couple of slashes through his violin, couple through his bow. You've got some missing on his nose and his ear. Whereas this guy's missing his entire neck, his nose chip is a little bit lower, he's got a different ear, and he's like missing half his foot. Whereas this guy's just missing his toe. So there are some differences that you can see between these. Another area is like this slash on the tailpiece. You'll see that in like the stock photos, I believe, but my right-handed one does not have that feature. So exact replicas, no, they're not, but how could they really build 50 guitars the exact same way? Maybe if they had Tom Murphy age each and every single one, which, you know, for $20,000, I'm kind of surprised they didn't have him recreate this. But it's just your standard specs of an SG, a solid mahogany body, and then we move on to the neck, which is also mahogany, and we have a rosewood fretboard. Now here's something where I'm also left a little bit disappointed. 1964, this would be a Brazilian rosewood fretboard, but we do not have Brazilian on here. I think, once again, for the price point that these guys are at, they should have went with the Brazilian, but maybe they didn't want to ruin Brazilian by finishing over it. It's still a nice fretboard though, don't get me wrong. And the fact that it's lacquered over is just so fascinating to me. It's not something you find on a Gibson. I thought I was going to really like this, but what I found is it shows fingerprint smudges a lot easier. So as far as a display piece, it's hard to make it keep clean if you actually want to pick this up and strum it occasionally. But the 0 fret starts our scale, and you can see that definitely lines up at 24 3/4, which is where it's supposed to be. Now the one downside to 0 fret nuts is they start to show wear. That's why the modern day ones are usually made out of stainless steel, even if the rest of the frets aren't. Because you can already see that there's some light divoting marks in there just because that's where all the string pressure's at. The nut in this case is not actually dictating the string clearance over the first fret. All this thing's doing is making sure that the strings don't move around on you. But our nut width is 1.71 inches. And by the 12th fret, we're looking at 2.07. That's kind of an interesting profile. And then our first fret neck depth here, 0.87, and then it beefs up to 0.97 by the 12th. And here's a visual representation of it. So it starts off rounded and rather thin, but then it definitely gets a wider feeling, but still continues to be super rounded. Now, as far as the face of the headstock goes, underneath the truss rod cover, here's what you're left to deal with. I really don't understand this, why threads are sticking out here. It's not as bad as that 12-string double neck. This one actually still has room to move. And we'll see in a minute that the other one's the exact same way. But the truss rod cover itself is just a blank plastic. It doesn't have any beveled edges to it, but it is multi-ply. You just don't see it on the other sides. And here you can see the aging job they did up here, and the old John Birch sticker residue that they have on there, and the Gibson logo. So everything's looking pretty cool here on the front. Now we move on to the back side. Pretty much the only thing mandatory here is you have a bare patch, and then they do the same finish checking technique. Here you can start to see where they get lazy and they just repeat the same pattern over and over. That's not exactly how real finish checking would look, but hey, when you need to make 50 of these things, you gotta age them and age them fast. And the back plate here actually has Tony Iommi's name etched into it. Now, I do not believe he etched those into that. He did sign them at the top of the headstock. We'll see that in a minute. But I'm seeing this at the same time as you guys. I'm curious if they shielded this. No, they didn't. Come on. That makes me believe they didn't actually tear apart his original one. That's a real letdown. So apparently his bridge tone pot is not connected in the original, and this was completely shielded off. This just has your standard wiring. So they did so much attention to detail, it's almost like they only got photos of the guitar and they didn't actually scan it and like do all the other stuff. I mean, when they call it an exact replica and they sell it for the price that they do, I kind of expect all the small details. But here's a closer look at that Tony Iommi scratching. Oh, and just a fun fact, sometimes people will accidentally call this guy Tommy Iommi, and I'll admit I've done that before, and it's because we mix his names. We bring the T down there and Tommy, and the other thing you'll see is people will spell his name with an I instead of a Y, and if you do that, you're actually accidentally referencing his daughter, who is also named Tony Iommi, but with an I at the end. I thought that was a fun little fact I ran into while researching him. We'll just take a quick moment to look around the edges of this guitar as well. They really did use some nice mahogany on this guy, but they do have additional wear areas right here on the edge. And once again, they have evidence of a trapeze tailpiece. So it's things like that that most people wouldn't even know that he had on his guitar that they did right, but the things that are on the inside that you can't see, it seems that they slacked a little bit. Then over here on his arm area, you can see where it's kind of got dinged up and worn off over the ages. So they tried to recreate that as best as possible. And of course, the relocated strap button. But they still have the hole on the back for the other one. Now moving up the neck here, they did a really nice job, I think, with the finish checking on the neck. It's probably because aging the neck is a little bit easier. You just gotta do the straight lines. You don't have to do all those intricate patterns and try to follow all the craziness that sometimes the necks will have. But then moving up here, what number did I get? I got number 24, so that is the second to last one. But just as a fun fact, of the 25 sets, it appears the USA dealers did not get match sets. I have yet to find a single dealer that got a complete perfect match. In fact, I was talking to another owner of a set, and his were also 10 numbers apart, so maybe that's something they did here. But you can see the Schaller style tuners here, and another attention to detail thing that I'm proud they did. Look, you've got a Phillips head, then you got a flat, then you've got nothing,
Another flat one, flat, and flat. So they definitely paid attention to the types of screws that were in there, or the lack thereof. And that's his signature right there. And you could just barely see the outline of the old strip style tuner that used to be on here made by Gibson. It was 3 on a side. You can also see the old screw holes. But this is another feature I really like in the fact that they're calling it a replica. They've stamped all of these with his original serial number, 175454. As a collectible piece, that's something that I can truly appreciate. Something else that tells me these are finished by different guys is the strings were actually wound in the 2 most popular ways. There's the old style that I hate when people lock the string on it, and then there's the new style that's like the Joe Bonamassa tech way. That's the way I prefer it. So there's definitely at least different people stringing these guys up. Here's the tenon cover. What's kind of interesting is it has a little notch right there. I wonder if that's on his original. We'll have to take a look at the other one. And the pickguard itself, they've done a little bit of a brown staining to the edges, so that gives it a nice little aged patina to it. But you still have the Gibson Custom Shop sticker. And the bridge is just a standard wraparound style. It does not look like it's an official Leo Kwan product, which is a little bit of a letdown. I'm not even sure if they actually make those yet today, though. I'm pretty sure you can pick these up for about 30, 40 bucks. Something else I like is the crude nature of the installation of the zero fret. They just kind of cut a shelf out of that nut. It doesn't look 100% professional, but that's probably how it's supposed to look anyways. So that's them paying tribute to the original. But now the big question is, how much does this thing weigh? Let's find out. Oh man, that was close. 6 pounds, 6.2 ounces. Let's go ahead and look at the right-handed one just for fun. And now this guitar looks normal to me. So in my unboxing episode, the pickup on this one actually it came loose, and I had said maybe it was the spring. I finally figured out what happened to this thing. Remember how I was telling you that nut is actually soldered into place or something similar to that, maybe welded. This welding did not hold, so that's actually come undone. So that's why this pickup can actually move up and down. So that'd be a pretty simple fix. Will I send it back to Gibson to get that done? I probably wouldn't see this guitar for a year if I did that. Because as long as you're not jostling it around, it doesn't really just come up on its own. It just got jostled in shipping. And then the bridge pickup here, it's the same thing that we saw on the last one, with all the same pickup routes.
As I was editing this, I saw another place where screw holes would be in the original that aren't on the replica, the neck pickup. It would normally have 2 screws right there because originally it had a regular P90 in it.
But what I like about this right-handed version is they got the color more aged. So they start off a dark cherry, but as the sun hits them over the years, they kind of turn into this more warmer cherry color. So this one is actually a lighter colored one than the more darker red one over there. So they're both technically era correct. You could have either or. I'm not sure which hue the original one is more closer to, but it's kind of interesting to have one of each. But I've got to say, I'm relatively ashamed of this age job. At least as far as the finish checking goes. They just repeated this same Tetris pattern all over the top of the guitar. That other one was done much more skillfully. That other one is a lot more attractive in my opinion. There was not a lot of, thought put into this one. And I don't mean to diss the guy that did it. I mean, he probably had to do so many of these himself, he probably got bored. But I will stand corrected. This one does have that slash. It's just a lot smaller. But here's our little monkey man, our witch hat knobs here, the output jack. The neck joint isn't quite as tight on this one, but still definitely substantial. And as far as the pickup readings, our bridge pickup is 17.08 in this one. And then up here, oh wow, 15.91. And our middle, just for fun, 8.24. And something I forgot to point out on that other one, the volume is actually worn off the top right there. But besides the color and aging, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing there. We'll take a quick pan over our fretboard here. You can see the inlays are nice and yellow, and you can see the whole fingerprint phenomenon that I'm talking about. Same style of truss rod set. You've got the same stuff up here because despite it being lefty, it's not actually reversed for the lefties up here. But one thing that is different, you're going to notice that the holly veneer is actually exposed along the top edges here. I don't really like the look of that, and you're going to see a giant scratch right there. I haven't seen that on many other ones, so that's just kind of an anomaly feature here that also tells you there's different people aging these things. Neck measurement wise, 1.71 on this one as well, and by the 12th, it's a similar 2.07. So it looks like they've got these fairly consistent here. That's a 0.88. And maybe this one's actually a little bit thicker at 0.1. Does anyone else think the whole double pickguard thing looks cool on this guy? That's a super fancy bat wing. But yet the bridge of this one does not have that little rubber bit on it. Okay. But it is really cool to note that this top tenon cover also has that same gash, so that's one of those features that all of them has to have. But something that really confuses me is why this one has finish chipping by the neck joint, whereas that other one did not have that anywhere. Maybe the other one is supposed to have that, or maybe it's just one of those varying things where, oops, the finish accidentally chipped. It's an aged guitar, but it's okay. I guess we'll never know. And as far as the back of this one, here's what it looks like. You've just got that same repeating pattern on this one as well. It just looks like you're playing Tetris on this one. So while I might not like the finish checking job on this guy, I do appreciate one detail that they got a little bit better on this one. The back strap button. That last one just had a hole drilled in it. But this one, you can tell they've actually took a strap button, probably hammered it in so it has the impression around it, because that's probably closer to what the original one would have. So that's a nice little attention to detail. As far as our wiring, this one looks completely the same, but this time I'm noticing a small sticker right there in the corner. And we've got the same engravings on it right here. And the other thing I love about this one is it got really choice mahogany. This one actually has some flame to it. I don't know if the original one does, but if you're looking for one of these, this one's definitely special in that aspect. Maybe not so special with the aging job on, but there's a few things they did better, a few things you have to live with. But then again, if you're shopping for one of these, I really doubt you can actually compare them, because most dealerships just sell these based on stock photos. I'm sure if you asked one for close-ups of the aging and relic job, they'd just look at you like a crazy nut. And in the future, when these things become scarce on the used market, yeah, you're not even going to be able to choose. Even today, there's very few brand new sets still available, but this one still has that same aging job. It almost feels like they went a little bit deeper with the finish checking right here. You can kind of feel that. But this guy is Tony Iommi, number 14, right-handed. You can see that he signed this one in the opposite way as the left-handed one. But you still have all those other things like one missing screw, the one Phillips head, and the rest of them flat. And this one weighs just about the same amount. Let's go ahead and plug these in and hear how these John Birch pickups sound.
Now that we know all about the Tony Iommi Monkey SG, what's my final thoughts on this thing? I started this saying, no guitar is worth $20,000, but if there was going to be one that was worth that much, this is an excellent guitar. It's got that whole thing where you strum it, you feel it all up the neck, you feel it all in the body. Some of that just has to do with it being an SG, but they definitely used choice mahogany on this one. I particularly like my right-handed one the best because look at that back, just like we were talking about earlier. The left-handed one does not have that, but playing this guitar, the tones are there. The neck pickup is just so magically juicy, and then when you mix that in with the bridge, I found myself loving that middle position. It had that certain
certain quirkiness to it that was just something like I've never heard before. And I've always liked dual P90 equipped guitars anyways. Then the bridge pickup, it's just that familiar bite. But this thing really nailed that kind of Black Sabbath tone. Now, I didn't always have it set up, super dark like those original recordings are. But this just had a bunch of bite and attack to it. And this whole lacquered over fretboard, at first I thought I was going to love it. And then when I actually got it, was kind of noodling around. I was a little bit unsure. But now that I've actually sat down and, played it extensively, I wasn't bothered by it. I didn't really notice any more dragging than usual. It's kind of just like a maple fretboard, except for it's this super dark color. So it kind of makes it look ebony-like. So if you're a collector and you have the means to spend $20,000 on a guitar, these are really cool. Now that I'm wearing all black, I feel like I could pull the cross off a little bit better. But this strap is actually super comfortable. My favorite thing about it is how you adjust it. It's a little belt buckle right here. It has those pre-slotted locations. There's only one other piece of case candy they should have totally done with these. 2 prosthetic fingertips, just like Tony Iommi's. That would be a lot of fun. So no 2 of these are going to be exactly alike, but I had a great time getting to experience the Tony Iommi Monkey SG. And I hope you guys enjoyed getting to see these 2 side by side as well. So the only thing left that we have to do is the Blacklight test. So here's something kind of quirky under Blacklight. The only thing that's really glowing is our little monkey man right here. The finish isn't doing too much, but then look at the neck pickups around. I wonder if that is like coated in a lacquer or made of a different material than the bridge pickup. Now, Tony's original obviously would glow a lot more than this in the finish, but this is just kind of like an aging test. They can't like truly age the lacquer the 50 plus years. And we've got the same phenomenon going on the right-handed one. This monkey actually looks a little bit more green. And same thing going on with that neck pickup. So I'd be curious to know if there is a difference of how they create those, or if one is lacquered. They don't necessarily feel different. I guess you could say this one is a little bit glossier in feel, but I didn't see anything like that under regular lighting situations. What's actually going to be cool about these things is as they age, the fretboard will also glow. Well, potentially. Let's check out the Zoo. And by Zoo, I'm talking about the original case. So what they've done is they've stylized it after the 50s, 60s Lifton styles. So you've got the Gibson badge right here. You have clasps. You still have one, though, that's a locking latch, but all the other ones are something I don't necessarily prefer, but it's how it is. But the inside of this is just that golden material. It's the same type of case interior as we saw on the Slash double neck. And they've got a little Lifton sticker right there. And something I guess, I don't know what Gibson was thinking here, is the case does not actually shut with all the case candy inside of it. The additional monkey decal is kind of a nice little touch. But I guess those guys are the same size. But as we saw earlier, you get the Iommi Certificate of Authenticity in here. This one's right-handed 14. If you think you might be interested in being the next owner of my Tony Iommi Monkey SGs, these are guitars that I wish I could keep, but it's like they're so expensive, I would rather use that money to document a bunch of other guitars. I'm not necessarily a long-term collector, but with only 25 sets made, these things will never be made again. If you're that type of guy that holds on to stuff, this might reward you handsomely. Well, you guys can check out those links in the description. They'll take you to the Reverb for sale page. Thank you, Troglodytes, for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.